Yogah Karmasu Kaushalam.
Let me begin by showing you a story slide entitled Success and Creativity. It is from here that I wish to address the first issue of instructional design, namely ineffective teaching. This is what leads mainly to a lack of instructional efficacy. There are several faulty assumptions made by faculty members that contribute to ineffective teaching. One of them is that knowledge ensures better teaching. This is not true. Knowledge of the content is vital, but adequate knowledge does not guarantee effective teaching. It is practice which makes a teacher perfect, and focus on developing that practice is usually at the expense of the belief that since I know, thus I can teach. The result is that the term knowledgeable faculty, within inverted commas, can be attributed to a very small group of teachers, and many remain frustrated in their attempts to communicate openly and effectively with students. The mastery of content cannot be equated with instructional effectiveness, and this can hamper instructional improvement. Good teachers are born, not made. This is another faulty belief. Research has demarcated the salient dimensions of effective teaching. These are skills that teachers can acquire even if they are not born with them. Their individual differences may make it simpler to acquire certain skills in comparison to others, as is the case in acquiring knowledge of content. The third belief, that teachers should provide only content-based instruction and not the subtler or deeper nuances. This assumption again is highly erroneous and flawed, as it highlights teaching texts and not teaching people. It is the same as saying that the syllabus is important, but the students are not. Content is both fluid and dynamic. It can transform with transforming curriculum. It can evolve and accumulate rapidly, and when teachers try to include more content in their courses, they quickly exhaust the capacity of such an endeavor. What they need to do is teach students how to analyze, evaluate, criticize, and collaborate with others to create new knowledge or find layers and nuances of interpretation beyond the superficial realm of facts and assertions. Teachers must explore content, not as an end, but as the means by which larger objectives can be accomplished. A lack of instructional efficacy on the part of a teacher leads to a narrow repertoire of instructional techniques and practices, and the inability to adjust to changes in pedagogical contexts and demands. On the other hand, introspecting upon one's own instructional practice, adding to one's repertoire, and focusing on student learning helps teachers discover value in their teaching, thus potentially avoiding the burnout that affects so many teachers who can easily be drained by meeting constant challenges, who can become bored by teaching the same course the same way, or can become frustrated and jaded by receiving unsuccessful feedback from students. In this regard, let me show you creativity and innovation and brought us to the core of effective teaching. Next, I would like to address the ways of developing instructional efficacy for effective teaching. There are various graded steps that should be meticulously followed to improve the efficacy of the instruction imparted. Analyzing the need for instructional awareness is one of them. I ask you, teachers, what do you actually do in the classroom? Why do you do it? Once you ask yourself this, you will realize that this involves everything from what you physically do in the classroom to why you structure the course in the way that you do. The second way is accumulating self-information. Watch a videotape of yourself teaching. Have a student observe you and offer feedback. Have a colleague observe you and offer feedback. Look at all the parts of the syllabi together. Complete one of the many different teaching lists. Ask for student input during a class. Yet another way is by establishing learning parameters. This is another way in which you can develop instructional efficacy. I ask you, what is the extent of your content mastery? What is the extent of the content mastery the students need to achieve? Why do they need to achieve that level of mastery? What specific skills do they need to acquire and why? How will the teacher ascertain if the students have achieved the content mastery and acquired the specific skills? Sometimes one course leads to another, or is positioned between courses, or is a bridge course, or is a remedial teaching course, or is an elective course, or is an alternate semester course. This may trigger the necessity of some group discussions. Sometimes the teacher has to establish learning parameters independently. Yet another way of developing instructional efficacy is by the choice of amendments or changes. First, as a teacher, you must question the need for change and how it must be implemented in the instruction of the course. Try to begin by changing the instructional policies and practices that conflict with student interest and student learning, or that are in conflict with instructional content or instructional setting, or that do not lead to the learning parameters that you as a teacher will assess. Let me give you an example. If, as a teacher, you believe that your students should think and work independently, but at the same time you insist on supervising every aspect of a project, then your teaching belief and your teaching practice are in conflict. Another example, if you are lecturing to a limited group of students, the instructional practice is in conflict with the setting. If the students are being directed to read 8 chapters, but you are discussing only 3 and evaluating them only on 2, then the learning outcomes and the instructional practices are in conflict. So once you have chosen the change, You must implement the change. How do we implement the change? The answer is we implement it in small ways, slowly, gradually, and with explanation. Students must be given an explanation for the changes being implemented, as this will enable them to achieve instructional awareness. A rationale must be projected for each part of the instructional assignments and evaluation. Students will better understand in this way why they are reading or writing or completing a project and what are the parameters of their assessment, if they are given such rationales and explanations. The creation of rubrics are time consuming, but eventually they lead to economizing time in assessment. Coming back to changes, after you have implemented the change, you must assess the impact of the change. Using multiple and appropriate assessment measures by the teachers can lead to the students' demonstration of knowledge in multiple ways. And if the teacher can schedule this within the allotted time, they should provide options. For example, offer the students the option of a test or a project, a test or a paper, group work or individual work. Because if teachers stay focused on the outcomes, the method of assessment might become a little more flexible. Yet another way of achieving instructional efficacy is by establishing cognitive outcomes and objectives such as parameters of knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. Knowledge requires memorizing facts, definitions, and this requires superficial understanding. Comprehension requires understanding material, and the expectation of a comprehension assessment is that the learner can explain content lucidly and cogently in an individual idiom. Application requires using abstract ideas in concrete situations, and it demands that students manifest the ability to solve simple problems. Analysis refers to the art of breaking down an idea into its individual components. Synthesis refers to the combining of multiple parts of literary content or linguistic inputs to create a new, holistic and integrated content, and this can lead to research, creativity, and open-ended interpretations. Evaluation involves making a performance-based assessment and articulating the criteria for that assessment. Some teachers may want a student to gain skill in higher order objectives, but their tests and questions will focus on memorization and comprehension. This then does not lead to effective instructional design. Setting clear objectives for each topic in their course will help them eliminate unnecessary assignments and lecture and clarify for students why they are being asked to perform certain tasks. Asking students to meet higher order objectives usually requires that they also use lower order ones, such as embedded tasks. When we consider pedagogical paradigms comparatively and choose the best one suited to our needs or closest to our teaching practice, we must study, compare, and analyze them to see which suits us most effectively. Traditional pedagogy propagates and adheres to the banking theory of education, in which the teacher deposits information into the empty brains of the students and withdraws that by means of tests which focus on rote memory. The teacher rarely explains the rationale for assignments or activities and rarely involves students in meaningful ways. The teacher unilaterally chooses how to establish goals, parameters, and outcomes, and also decides on the choice of instructional design without any student-based input. In contrast to traditional pedagogy, we have what is called student-centered pedagogy, in which students are involved in setting course objectives, selecting topics, and focusing on discussions instead of lectures. This kind of pedagogy and practice encourages student participation and involves students in evaluation and grading. A third kind of pedagogy is subject-centered pedagogy, which highlights the subject as central to learning and negotiates the best way of interaction between teacher and student. The teachers demand and facilitate dialogue, supervise the students until they achieve instructional awareness, and involve the students in multiple ways while developing objectives, lessons, and creating assessment rubrics. Many teachers use a blend of all these three approaches but often prefer a single approach. Each approach does not rule out the use of others, but for example, lecture plays a very small role in many student-centered pedagogical contexts and a much larger role in traditional pedagogy. Once teachers have understood and chalked out the most basic structures of their course, they must focus on the strategies they will use to implement that structure effectively, to enable that structure to be completely and successfully achieved. They can divide their techniques and tactics into two different strategies. The first strategy is a combination of daily tactics. What will they be doing every day? And episodic tactics, as in what they will do from time to time. The second strategy is to divide tactics into two categories, complex and simple. Socratic instruction, that is teaching students how to read critically, creating an oral test rubric, developing parameters and techniques for self-assessment of the student, these are all complex tactics. As these complex strategies have multiple paths and often require an extended period of time to be executed, they are generally more difficult to implement. On the other hand, most simple tactics, like motivating the shy and diffident students who do not volunteer to answer or participate in a discussion, asking those students to summarize what other students have narrated, encouraging students to articulate the purpose of an assignment or to express a question in another way in the classroom. These are rather easy to apply and can be time-saving as well as attention-garnering. Thus, instructional design requires the choices a teacher makes while thinking about instruction in both structural and tactical ways. Overall structural thinking, for example, about the concept of the course, can help free a teacher from the didactic model of instruction into which we have all been conditioned. And this can also eliminate the ineffective teaching that invariably and frequently happens through one-sided lecturing in a classroom, even across many institutions today. Simple and complex tactical thinking can provide the means by which teachers can follow through on their structural decisions in an effective way. Teaching will not be transformed simply because teachers philosophically believe in the value of critical thinking. They must find practical ways to bring it into instruction both structurally and tactically. When we teach English to non-native students in Indian classrooms, we must remember that we are not simply addressing the students' academic requirements, we are also addressing a personal need. We must teach in a way so as to enhance the students' self-confidence, to encourage and motivate them to learn English fearlessly, to encourage them to possess and use the language without inhibition, to encourage them to communicate with whatever language tools they may have access to in case they are fumbling, in case they lack appropriate vocabulary. We, teachers, must encourage students to teach English as a communication tool and not as a cumbersome academic subject. We must show them that English can be engaging and experimental. We must show them how to establish a trusting relationship with the language and encourage them to do the same with their classmates, to give them adequate experience of an exhaustive gamut of English language usage in a contextual and familiar milieu with real life scenarios and appropriate environments. Physical activities help in learning the words in sentences, and subsequently, an activity based approach is always better than the traditional lecture method explanatory classroom teaching with repetition, imitation, drills, etc. Reading and writing require consistent and persistent effort and practice by the students, and thus should be less compared to the volume of speaking and listening taught in the early stages in English language teaching. This must be gradually increased in volume as the levels of teaching escalate with age and experience. Numerous texts, audiovisual aids, technological resources may be adopted to offer instruction in the English language, and some such devices may be selected and used to enhance the lessons as suited to the ability of the students and their level of intelligence. This will lead to innovation by teachers and generate more interest by students. The teachers must emphasize fluency, not precision or accuracy, in the earlier stages of English language teaching, as the fundamentals of motivation, fluency, and correct pronunciation must be built slowly and steadily. If the teachers themselves have a good command of English with model pronunciation capabilities, their students will acquire the language better and faster. So friends, we need to work on ourselves first. We need to polish our vocabulary. We need to polish our enunciation, pronunciation, and articulation of clear English language. Poems, alliterative verses, or songs must be read out aloud in classroom situations to enable the students to internalize some words and sentences and enhance their command of English. For this purpose, English must be used regularly and ubiquitously in the classroom. The focus on the number of words, phrases, and sentences to be acquired correctly should be less, and inculcating an ability to communicate in meaningful contexts connected to the lives of the students should be greater. In the later years of a student's life, the focus must be on honing their written linguistic skills in order to acquire, develop, and perfect the ability of self-expression, both critical and creative.